Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Toby Reads from Incredibly Boring Regulatory or Standards Documents. Today we're going to talk a little bit about MRI levels of training, levels of authority or supervision within the MRI environment. Probably most popularly known are the ACR's level 1 and level 2 trained MR safety criteria. In a more practical sense, the only required MRI safety training for any licensure or accreditation explicitly defined is that in the Joint Commission. And that only requires MRI safety training for MRI operators, technologists. It does not require it for the radiologists who are legally responsible for the safety of the exam, or for anybody else working in the MRI environment who is not an MR system operator. So while that's the regulatory version, it's not sort of the tiered version that we understand. And I want to talk with you a little bit about the tiered version. So in the ACR manual on MR safety and the prior documents, guidance document for MR safety 2013, 2007, on back, they have described MRI training in 2 levels, level 1 and level 2. Level 1, first off, and this is, I don't mean to steal this, this is from a thread on Twitter from the Year of MRI Safety account. If you haven't seen it, you may want to go check it out. But in there they identified that we presume that there's some sort of fixed curriculum, that everybody who has level 1 training got trained with a certain set of items, certain understanding of MRI safety. And similarly, everyone who is trained to level 2 has an equivalent training between and among the level 2 folks, which is greater than the training received for level 1. And while in general principle that's true, that really is not at all what the ACR's level 1 and level 2 training is about. Essentially, it's not meant to describe curriculum. It's meant to describe access into the controlled access parts of the MRI suite, zones 3 and zones 4, and what is a minimum ticket to enter, really, MRI. So level 1 training is training deemed to make a person not a danger unto themselves. They don't necessarily know enough at that point to be responsible for somebody else's MRI safety, but they do know enough to be responsible for their own MRI safety. Level 2, by contrast, is somebody who is not only trained to a level where they can be responsible for themselves, but they can be responsible for the MRI safety of other people inside zone 3 and zone 4. So that's it. That's, per the ACR, that's the differentiation between level 1 and level 2. Either level 1, you're responsible for one person, yourself, or level 2, you can be responsible for yourself and others in the MRI environment. Now, what does it take to get to level 1 or from level 1 to level 2? That is defined by your supervising physician, your MRMD, the radiologist in charge of the MR service or program. It is not prescribed in the ACR documents or elsewhere what this training must consist of. Again, I point you to the Year of MR Safety Twitter feed where they essentially posited some minimum training criteria. But one of the challenges with level 1, level 2 is it's off the rack. There are only 2 potential sizes that fit, right? You're either a level 1 or you're a level 2 if you just take the ACR at its word. But I'm going to throw a curveball at you. I'm going to start with MHRA, Now, it's not a perfect analogy, but MHRA is essentially the UK's FDA. UK folks, please don't hate on me. I know that that's not a perfect analogy, but for the US folks, it will help. The MHRA, in their MRI safety guidance document, actually detail 3 different levels of MRI safety training and authorization. And I'm not suggesting that 3 is the magic number or better than 2 or 2 is somehow better than 3. What I'm illustrating for you guys is that there is not a solution. If you are feeling square peg in round hole-ish because you're trying to figure out how to assign access provisions or restrict access when it comes to tech aides who aren't the MR system operators, so they don't fit the Joint Commission's requirement for MRI safety training. So does that mean that they can only be level 1, or because they don't fit Joint Commission's requirements, maybe they don't fit at all? Maybe they're level 0, with respect to MRI safety training. But that doesn't make any sense, because we want them to assist the technologist, so they have to have some level of MRI safety training. What about the radiologist, right? Joint Commission says we don't need to provide any MRI safety training to radiologists, and yet the radiologist is the one who's legally responsible for the safe execution of the exam. So the person legally responsible for the safe execution of the exam doesn't have to have any safety training for that modality. That doesn't make any sense either. The problem is that when we look at accreditation regimes and expectations, and we try and match them up with Joint Commission, the Joint Commission standards, match those up with the ACR and level 1 and level 2, it just doesn't work. I mean, the gears are grinding, they don't mesh, they don't harmonize in terms of a structure or a method. In some cases, they just don't make any sense. And it's not even worth trying to make them harmonize with other elements of best practice or regulation or accreditation. Some of them we just kind of need to disregard. My point is that when it comes to MRI safety training, your goals with respect to safety training and designating individuals as level 1 or level 2, or whether you want to create new levels, level 1.1, 1.2, 1.5, 1.7, 2.1, 2.6, you are perfectly entitled to take the basic level 1, level 2 structure. Level 1, you can be responsible for yourself alone and not other people, and ergo level 1 people don't have independent access. They can't badge into zone 3 and zone 4 because then they have the ability to let other people in, and they at level 1 they're not supposed to be responsible for other people's safety. Or level 2, where if we follow what the Joint Commission implies from their MRI safety training requirements, that really only is germane to the MR system operator. But we need other people who are trained to level 2. So how does that work? Create your own. Define for yourself sort of minimum levels of expectations based on level 1 and level 2, but then beyond that, what additional skills or knowledge or training or competency is required for these, I don't want to call them unusual because we see them all the time, but irregular MRI roles that aren't the technologist and aren't the radiologist. So tech aides and transport and respiratory and anesthesia and nursing, and the list goes on and on. These individuals whose job duties may bring them to MRI fairly regularly, how do we want to train them? You don't have to train these individuals to a prefabricated role that you set up for technologists. That's probably not appropriate for a lot of the training. And you also don't have to accept a dumbed down version of what is appropriate, safe, and effective at your site. You can have sort of base level competencies, but for anesthesia and respiratory, we also want to make sure that you know these elements, right? For nursing, for tech aides, we want to make sure that you have the base level competency, but we also want to make sure that you know these elements, right? So you can adjust and tailor level 1 and level 2 training and competency expectations to the unique needs of personnel working within your MRI department. And it doesn't have to be cookie cutter. It doesn't have to be off the rack, one size fits all, or two sizes fits all. You can tailor this to your particular needs, your particular site expectations. So anyway, beyond that, I recommend that everybody interested in MRI safety familiarize yourself with the MHRA document. There's a lot of really good information in there besides training. And then, of course, I think if we're going to be responsible about MRI safety, we're going to be looking at the ACR manual as our best practice guide. Thank you very much. I hope that this has been helpful to you.